So, good evening, everyone. My name is Chinyarem Chibundu, and I will be doing the summary for Sidman's text, chapter 17, this week. And the chapter's title is Positive Reinforcement at Home and School. Now, Sidman opens the chapter by saying that children are, of course, special opportunities for us, but that at the same time, they have their special problems. You know, that these children are constantly exploring and encountering and experiencing new things in the environment, and that they will require a lot of help, but that sometimes this help that they want from us may sometimes become like a burden or like a pain in the butt, you know, and they become monsters to us. So it goes on to open the chapter with a subtitle, At Home, that children express themselves by crying, screaming, and that this gradually builds up to aggression and being destructive, you know, and that these things get them what they want and they become satisfied. So that infants develop a coercive practice, and that when we reinforce them, we inevitably increase these coercive practices. And that because these children, you know, become like pain in the neck, we want to punish them. But that we should remember that punishment may, you know, give us peace, you know, at that particular time, but that it has its side effects, and that the child will be left with no way to adapt constructively. Well, he goes on to say that that instead of punishing these children, that we should provide a diversion for them in the way that they become productive in the environment, they can interact productively with the environment, and that when we practice using positive reinforcement, that we end up with happy children, and that parents should always be aware or always be in the know to recognize the signals of behavior that will actually lead to inappropriate behavior. That we should try to get the child to do something good and then we reinforce it. He also goes on to explain that children who have grown into adulthood and with this entitlement mentality, that they react inevitably, or they react with frustration and uncontrolled anger and violence. So that we should positively reinforce our children so that they are happy and they can live a happy life. That we should strike a balance by maintaining positive contingencies, and at the same time we can generate trust and security. Now it goes on to talk about the school. It says that when positive reinforcement is effectively used, that it is a good teaching tool, and that because in our training or as teachers being trained, that we deal with failure instead of taking advantage of a learner's success, and that it is expected that when a teacher gets a student to do something new, that the teacher should positively reinforce immediately. It gives an example of that when Jane gets better in mathematics, that we can allow her go shopping and pay for something that she wants. That teachers should always first teach and then gradually allow the learner to use their new learning. That learning itself becomes reinforcing, making other reinforcers available. And then he goes on to say that most reinforcement in the education or in the education system is negative reinforcement, because we are only engaging the child, or we only reinforce or negatively reinforce the child studying rather than making him understand the benefits of studying. So in order to avoid failure, in order to prevent failing, the child will either have avoidance behavior or escape behavior. Now he goes on to say, give us another subtitle, trial and error learning. So he says, whose trial and whose error? So he says that even with effective learning, that coercion will not be eliminated using only positive reinforcers. That the usual assertion in education is that learning takes place through trial and error. That is, people learn through mistakes. But that a teacher who is effective will never reinforce mistakes, because mistakes will be maintained if they are reinforced. And that when we withhold reinforcement, that we punish, and this generates avoidance or escape, in the sense that because we are not positively reinforcing, it means we are punishing. But that we cannot avoid escape, or escape. That if we cannot avoid or escape, that we counterattack, and that this is what students would normally do. So Sidman explains that it is better to reinforce success during trial and error than to ignore success at all, but that this will not eliminate coercion. Now, he also goes on to say that we need to find non-coercive ways to instill security and self-confidence in our children, and at the same time maintain positive contingencies. That as parents or as teachers, that we should provide realistic contingencies that children are capable of carrying out. So Sidman recommends that when a child fails, that it is an opportunity for us to teach them and not punish them. That is, teaching should be a reinforcing interaction for both the child and the parent. So the text also advises that when it seems punishment is inevitable for a bad behavior, that sometimes we can apply immediate punishment, but that sometimes emergency punishment may be necessary to end a dangerous situation. So he goes on to explain that non-contingent delivery of positive reinforcers may allow the receiver think that he deserves it without having to do anything. And he used an example of elders who get attention, who get everything they need from the environment, and that we need to make sure that the attention we are giving them is because of the constructive behavior that they are exhibiting. And he goes on to explain that as long as we see education as a trial and error process, that non-reinforcement of error will remain a coercive element, and that students will only value success because they are trying to avoid failure. He says that extinction of error is important in trial and error learning, that we may never be able to do away with failure, and that extinction, that is the only way to eliminate extinction, is to eliminate failure. He goes on to say that errorless learning is possible, that when teachers apply effective programming, that trial and error usually occurs when the teaching is unsuccessful or when no teaching is taking place. So he goes on to explain what teaching program is, and he says that when learning has its prerequisites, that is, learning is in steps, an effective teaching program will entail that the student would have learned the simple foundation of what they have to know. That is, before you get to know a thing, that you know the steps that lead to that particular knowledge. So he said effective programming is seen to be successful in developing new behavior in students and also eliminating error during learning, that it enhances the teacher's ability to specify what is to be learned. And he goes on to say that the teacher's ability to know the behavioral end product will bring about effective programming, that a teaching technology is determined to be successful by behavioral analysis if only the behavioral analysis can be applied in teaching errorlessly. So it goes on to say that when students know the prerequisite of what is to be learned, that error will be extinguished and they will be successful. And that we should remember that these prerequisites or steps, when reinforced, will enable the teacher to do other jobs effectively. Thank you. That will be all.